So traditionally, by looking at the trees and reading Mother Nature, it's a sense we all had. Since we've got iPhones and all this, we can check the weather, we can check this and that, we lose those senses in our bodies. We have to try to keep those alive and pass those on so that knowledge never dies. Traditionally, because we were island people, and the island was born out of the ocean, so the ocean to me is like my grandmother. This land is my mother here. The land that we live on now is my mother, so I respect both my grandmother and my mother. Welcome everybody to Stradbroke Island. My name is Matt Burns. Today we're going to have a look at some of our plants on the island here that are used for medicines. Some of the plants are fairly new to the island here, so the old people have found that they can actually get medicines out of these new trees that have arrived on our islands here in the last 150 to 200 years. The first one we've got here is a guava tree, which actually originates from South America. These are also used a lot in the Melanesian islands, so a lot of these were thought to be brought over with the Melanesian people in the slavery days. So the guava tree, we have 4 species of these guavas here on the island. So the old people found by using the young shoots of these trees here for gum ache and toothache, it has a bit of a anesthetic medicinal purpose about it, so they would rub that onto their gums. We also found that the Javanese people also use this same technique. Elders use that same technique as well for their gums. It also produces different types of fruit. So this one here is the yellow guava. These are only very small guavas. They do get very large sort of fruits on them, and this will be white inside. And then we have another one which is the green guava, which will have a red inside of this plant as well. And then we also have cherry guavas that grow here as well, but we don't actually use those leaves. This plant here is the only one we actually use the leaves on. All right, we're going to head down a little bit further here and have a look at some other plants. Okay, this plant here is called a gooseberry. These are just coming into season now. They'll get a little bit bigger than this, and when they're ripe, this little bag here will actually pop open, and a yellow fruit will actually be able to see in there, and that's when we'll eat the fruit from this gooseberry. You can see just behind the gooseberry here all the different types of foods that our elders ate from the islands here. This is actually called a midden site. So this particular site is around 10,000 years old, so it is a fairly ancient site, and it gives you an insight into the types of foods that we'd eaten, and also the foods we travelled to the other side of the island to get as well. So you've got what we call a yuguri shell here. So these are only found on the ocean side, so our people actually travelled over and brought these types of shells back with us as well. So a lot of these shellfish actually produce a lot of proteins in the flesh of these. Just on the ground here, these are very common on the island as well. It's native spinach. This one is a small one. The leaves do get rather large on these depending on the areas where they're at. These are very high in your vitamins. So when in the early days, the ships that came from overseas to England, from England and all those places, were highly malnutritioned. So they had scurvy, and this was the actual cure for scurvy. So it's very high in vitamins and also in proteins as well. So it's about 3% in protein. If you add hot water to it, it actually bumps it up. So it makes it a little bit more powerful in the proteins as well. They do have a bit of poison in them, so they do have to be blanched or roasted on the fire briefly, and that actually gets rid of that bitter taste out of them. So these can actually make you a little bit sick in the belly if you eat those raw. So the Macarena, as the leaves get larger, they'll get a little bit bigger than this as well. These are also used to wrap our food in and cook in cup murray, which is just under the ground a little bit. And this also helps to retain the moisture in your meats and things like that. We also make spears from this tree as well, from the suckers of this tree, which grow fairly straight. And we also retain a medicine out of this tree as well. So what you do, if you have a small cut, especially in this area here, so this area is known as Gumpi, which means place of oysters. So you do get a lot of little cuts on you. So oyster cuts can be very infectious. So this is one of our cures for the oyster cut. So we'll clean the cuts out, and you can see the sap that's starting to come out of here. Okay, I might just grab that out. Okay, so this sap will be actually put into the cut, because it's a non-toxic plant, this sap is acts as a band-aid. You can also break some of the leaf off and put that on there as well. So this is the Macarena. Growing right next to the Macarena tree is the cotton tree. They look very similar, but if you look hard, you can actually tell the difference in these plants. So this one does not have a sap vein like the Macarena. So this one, you can actually eat the flowers from this tree. It's known as a native beach hibiscus. So we can actually eat the flowers from this. We also make fire sticks out of the branches as well. And then also rope and string is made from this tree as well. So they're fairly useful trees to us. All right, so this is the grey mangrove. We've got a few different varieties here. The grey mangrove will actually produce a round fruit or seed that comes off the plant. It is actually poisonous, so you do have to actually, you can either soak it in water for a few weeks, or you can throw it in the hot coals and cook it that way, and that will leach out the poisons from this plant. Normally this plant is only eaten in emergency situations if you're really starving. Okay, so just out here behind the wreck here, we're just coming into mullet season now. And this area here, if you study these particular fish, which I have done for many years, you can actually work the pattern of where these fish will actually be sitting. So at the moment we've got young male fish that are going to be sitting out here behind the wreck here for a few months, and then in another couple of weeks or so we'll start to see the big females coming through. The females will actually travel through. Some will hang in this area, but the majority of them will actually travel around the corner to a safer point, and you'll find a lot of the males hanging around this area here. So as the tide comes in, these fish will follow it, and they'll have the same pattern each day and each night. So they'll move the same way they just came in. So it's very easy, if you study these fish, it's very easy to actually tell where their movements are. Another thing is relying on the pelican and the birds to fly over, and what the birds will actually do is they spook the fish, and the fish will actually move. So if we don't know where they're sitting, we watch the bird fly, and then when we see the bird fly, he'll show us where the fish are, because they'll spook and they'll make a bit of a ruckus in the water. These fish aren't actually scattering, they're dropping straight to the bottom. So this is where we know the fish are going to be sitting, so we can shoot nets around them, or we can throw spears in towards those fish as well. Okay, this little plant growing along the foreshore here is called Pigface. This is the actual fruit starting to come into season now. This will turn dark maroon, and that's when it's ready to pick. So we eat the inside of this plant, which is like a salty grape. The leaves on the plant are actually very salty as well. So these are eaten with fish meat and also kangaroo meat as well. The leaves, you've got to eat it with some meat, because it does leave a bit of a dry residue in your mouth. So you've got to have a bit of a mixture when you're eating this plant. And once again, you don't eat a lot of it, so you eat little bits of it with your meat to give you that saltiness in your meat as well. So this is the paperbark tree here. Its traditional name is Ujuru. These are a fairly important plant or tree in our culture. So traditionally we would cut big slabs of bark off these plants, and we can actually use those for making our huts. The bark was also used in burial ceremonies as well. We also make black paint from the burnt charcoal from these trees as well. You can obtain fresh drinking water from these trees, so you have to actually find where it bulges out. If you hit it with a sharp instrument, you should get fresh drinking water. Coming into the winter as well, we'll start to see these trees flowering, and then we actually get those flowers off it, and we soak it. We make a kulumin, which is like a container, and we put fresh water in there, and we soak the flowers in there, and that gives it a bit of a sweet drink, so you do get a bit of vitamin C. So this is another tree introduced from England called the camphor laurel tree. So a lot of people use this plant in the mid 1900s for cold and flu, or by getting the plants and crunching them up. You can sniff them, you can put them in your bedding, all that type of stuff, and it just lets off that smell to help relieve colds and flus. So before European came to Australia, there was no colds and flus and diseases like that. So Aboriginal people were still using traditional methods of plants and medicines right up even to today's society. We still use some bush medicines and plants. This is the native ginger here. The ginger is actually in the roots of this tree. It's a very woody sort of tasting plant, the ginger out of this. So once again, you cut murray it, which makes it a lot more tenderizer, but we didn't really eat the roots of this plant too much. We were more after the berries that grow on this tree. So this is the stems that happens, and these will be full of purple berries on there. So those purple berries are eaten. They have a bit of a sour taste to start with, but they are a very nice eating plant. We also use the leaves to wrap foods and things in as well, and then we also use it as a bandage as well. This is the pandanus tree here, traditionally called Wynnum in our language here. It's a fairly useful tree. The leaves are used for weaving. You can also eat the young leaves at the base of these plants as well. It has a white sort of starch cabbage-like tasting to it, so they can be edible. It also produces a very large ball of fruit, which grows around a soccer ball size, and these are some of the fruits. These are a bit old now, but they do get very large, and you can see something's eaten the ends of these, and the reason that you eat the end of this plant is that it's actually very sweet, so it's almost like sugar, and you eat that, so you find a lot of the insects and animals, possums and things like that will eat these. They do have a little bit of a poison in them that can irritate your throat, so it's best to cook them first. And then if you crack this open, you'll actually find peanuts inside of here as well. So it is, like I said, a fairly useful plant.